welcoming everybody, because what's so lovely about these webinars is we get to see people we know really well, people we know a little bit, and people that we don't know at all really. So it's great to have that mix of people, and thank you very much for joining us. This is, as you know, a webinar on collaboration, and the three of us who are going to be sort of making sure it runs smoothly from Capella Horizons. So I'm Lorna from Capella Horizons, a co-director, along with Rosie and Ian. And we have a group of facilitators for Capella Horizons who, just a really big thank you to them for giving your time. And we've got some speakers, and a big thank you to all of you, because I'm sure there's such a rich and diverse pool of knowledge and learning from all of you and your experiences, which hopefully we can harvest a little bit today. So I'll move on to the next slide, which is just laying out what we're going to do. So the objectives today are to build relationships, share our learning on collaboration, and through doing so, hopefully do some co-creating of some kind of tools and inspirations, explorations around collaboration, which can help us do it better. So they're the three main objectives, and how we're going to do this is I'm just going to do a short bit of scene setting. I'm going to hand over to Seamus. Seamus O'Gorman is an advisor with Capella Horizons, and he's also works for DOCAS, which is the Irish Association of Non-Governmental Development Organisations. Seamus has been with us really wanting to explore the whole area of collaboration and where that goes, and he'll be talking more about what he wants to do with that and how he can generate interest to provide more insights on how to do it effectively. We're going to first of all, after Seamus has presented, go into some group discussions quite early, because as I said, I think we've all got great experiences of collaboration, and I think both good and bad, and usually our organisation very much is about building on strengths, but in this instance we want to find out what were the sticky points, what went wrong, what didn't work, because I think there's great learning in that, and that's hopefully what Seamus is going to take forward through this piece of work. We're going to have a plenary and then reflections from, we've got two speakers today. We have Kamal Shaheen, who is our newest director. He's director of strategic partnerships at Capella Horizons, and he's also a director of Paper Boat, and we've had a strategic partnership with Paper Boat for the last 3 years, so we're very familiar with working together in that collaborative space. And also we're going to hear from Ralph Sequeira, who's also an advisor with Capella Horizons, and again we've worked very collaboratively through his involvement with Edmund Rice globally. So then, to finish off, Seamus is going to outline what the next steps could be and how we can take this forward. So that's the plan. And for those of us who aren't familiar with how we work at Capella Horizons, if I could have the next slide. So people always say you have much more effective learning if you're having fun. We want this to be an enjoyable hour and a half. You've all taken time out of your day. So it's more of a conversation, structured conversations around collaboration. Everyone's voice needs to be heard, and people, it's not a critical space. It can be a space of challenge, but in a positive, respectful way. And I think when we're in breakout rooms, it's fine to keep your microphones on, but when we're in the big room, if we put them on mute, then we don't get a lot of background noise. And feel free to use the chat, and we will record the plenary. We won't be recording the actual breakout rooms. And the facilitators who are with us will be taking lots of notes in the breakout rooms as well. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Rosie, who's just going to say a bit more about why collaboration is important to us at Capital Horizons and how we approach it. Thanks,
Great.
Rosie.
Thanks, Lorna. Yeah, so we thought we'd just explain a bit more about Capital Horizons, just in case there's some quite new people to this call who don't know so much, although looking at a lot of the faces, I think a lot of you do, so that's fantastic. And it's lovely to see lots of you again that I've not seen in a while. So just a small reminder that Capital Horizons, we want a vision where leaders are delivering a sustainable future for all. And to do this, we want to be courageous, compassionate, and creative in facilitating transformational change. And we really want to inspire and enable people to think differently, act differently, and learn differently throughout all their work. And we've sort of got this ripples on a pond model that we use quite a lot to sort of explain how we try and do this. So we try and work with individuals like many of you, and help with your sort of personal learning and your personal journey. And then in turn, we work with organizations, and you as individuals work with organizations to make a transformation there. And we hope that that then leads to wider societal change that we're all after. And why is collaboration important to us? Well, first and foremost, we went through a new strategy renewal process last year, and we worked with at least 80 different members of the CAPLA community who really identified collaboration as something extremely important to the work we're doing and the work in this field. So as you can see, increasing collaboration is one of our strategic goals, and it's something we're really passionate about advancing over the next 3 years, and obviously longer than that. We also have this sort of geese analogy that we use a lot, and for some of you, we may have made you fly around like mad geese at times, but just to show that, you know, working together and moving together always helps us to go further, and that we really truly believe that collaboration is such an important element to everything we do and we do with our partners. And then most importantly, collaboration is important to us because we believe it's important to you. And a lot of our partners we work with are really striving to collaborate in interesting and different ways. We work with a lot of networks like the EAUC and DOCUS, as Lorna's mentioned, and many others. And I see lots of faces here today, and I know that lots of you are collaborating in many different ways. So we want to learn and explore more about collaboration because we want to be in aid of you and in support of you. And for us, our community is the most important thing to us. So having you here today to explore these topics and understand the challenges and difficulties and barriers and also opportunities and excitement that collaboration can bring is really important. So some of you, we've heard Alex, you did the homework. Some of you may have watched the video that we sent about the sort of orchestra, the flash mob coming together, and some of you might be quite inspired by that. No worries if you didn't, but we just thought we'd get you going with a bit of interaction, and we're going to create a word cloud together. So I'm going to put a link in the chat, and if you'd like to click on that link, we want you to say in one word, what is a key ingredient of effective collaboration? You know, what is important about collaboration to you? And we'll start to see those words popping up. I will just share it, and you can submit more than one if you've got a few different ideas, and the words that are bigger have been said more than once, so you'll start to see the key threads coming through, like communication, fantastic, trust, humility, honesty, success, what have we got, enjoyment, that's nice, compassion, energy, listening, cultural alignment, that's good, fantastic, shared goals. This is fantastic, and we'll be covering quite a lot of this throughout the call today, and I'm sure a lot of this will come up in the breakout rooms as well. So thank you, everyone. That's lovely. So I'm now going to pass over to Seamus, who's going to just sort of situate this a little bit more. Thanks, Seamus.
Thanks, Lorna, and thanks, Rosie. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be here, and really great to have this time with people to connect with CAPLA to explore this kind of area of collaboration. And I hope it'll be really helpful next while we have for that. Just to say, I'm just going to begin with a little example. At the weekend, it was my mother-in-law's 84th birthday. Don't tell her that I said that, but it was her 84th birthday. And my wife, who's down there on the screen, who's Patricia Higgins, we bought her, her and her sister bought her a bird feeder or a bird table as a new thing, that it would be kind of a lovely image that she'd be able to look out her window and kind of as the years go by to be able to look at this. And I was sitting there watching them putting it up and thinking that'll be a lovely thing. And then I was going, but it's in a very windy place, in a very open space, in a beautiful garden. And then it fell to me to be the one to put the kind of clamps in to hold it down. And I was thinking that'll be really easy, very green, very wet, very mucky field. Just go out there and knock these in and it'll be grand and it'll hold it and keep it there. Went out to do it and was trying very hard to get these clamps into the ground and nothing would hold. There was no way. They were bending, twisting, cracking, little bit of language, a little bit of cursing. So this idea of this beautiful thing that's going to open up these lovely possibilities for, there was no way of holding it down to make it for real. So we reached a kind of compromise solution. But I suppose it's once again taught me something that's, I think, is very important in my life, that I learned what you think is going to happen and what you think you're going to be able to do can be very different to what actually happens. So I had just made one small mistake. I'd seen the green grass surface. It's a wet area, thought no problem. But actually underneath the surface, it was where a house had been built. So it's probably full of all sorts of rocks and bricks and rubbish and all sorts of things. So there was absolutely no getting this in. And I suppose in a way that's an important kind of metaphor for me when I think about collaboration. If we look at, Rosie, can you share the slide? Or yeah. So I work in the field of international development and have done for many years. And I look at things like the Sustainable Development Goals, the global goals agreed in 2015. And just moving on to the next slide, Rosie. And people like these really big global commitments and great plans and leaders coming from all around the world and really committing to achieve the kind of better world that we probably all want to achieve. And things like a plan of action, all countries, all stakeholders will act in collaborative partnership and will implement the plan. They say in the agenda for that, for transformation, and that we're determined to mobilize the means required to implement this through a revised global partnership. So I see that and see such extraordinary commitments and the kind of things I would hope for and want in the world that would be there, that there would be these plans and these commitments and international collaboration and all this. And then what I actually see, to the next slide, Rosie. When I look at my phone and my children tell me I'm looking at my phone all the time, when I'm looking at my phone, what I'm actually seeing, the images of our world are images of biodiversity loss, climate injustice, expanding or great racism around the world, Afghanistan, what happened there in terms of advancing things. And the last is an image of global vaccine inequity in Nepal. So I see inequality, I see climate change, I see racism, I see conflict. So I see, despite these plans and all the leaders coming together, hoping for this change, this is the kind of thing I see. And I suppose collaboration comes from me out of that kind of, in that space is where I think of collaboration as maybe, do we attend to the soil enough of what allows us to implement the plans that we have? So we get the commitments, we get the plans, there are 169 targets, but are we attentive enough to the soil within which that as human beings, we must work together to get there? So on to the next slide. And that leads me to the kind of core question that I suppose I'd want to set this kind of learning and this session and a research project that I want to work on with CAPLR. And it's really to look in very real, honest, open ways about what can we do as our individuals, in our organizations, in our societies. What are the things that we need to learn together to increase the chances of the more effective inter-organizational collaboration our world so needs? So if we want the commitments of the Sustainable Development Goals or whatever our international commitments to peace, prosperity, planet, whatever, if we want those commitments, what kind of learnings do we really need to take on as individuals, as organizations, to give us a better chance of increasing that? And that's kind of the context for this seminar. And I'll go to the next, Rosie. And I suppose when you look at those stark images, you can see sometimes the gap can just seem too big. You can see that there's a huge gap where we need to get to in climate or where we need to get to in racism or inequality. And I suppose I come at this, and probably influenced by a Kapler, the very positive and strengths-based approach. It's always important to hold in mind that there have been extraordinary things achieved in human history, absolutely extraordinary things, which at a certain time and place probably seemed beyond any possibility. So on this slide, I've just put a couple there of the civil rights movement in the USA, Mandela, end of apartheid, women's vote, and then maybe particularly, I suppose, I'm speaking from Donegal at the moment and close to Derry, so I think particularly of the possibilities of what somebody like John Hume achieved in Ireland, in the history of the relationships between Ireland, North, South, United Kingdom, the very broken, divided, fractured relationships. And he was the kind of man who somehow found it in himself to find a way of thinking that there is a different possibility for how people can work together. And the really valuable thing of that is he thought of that possibility when it didn't seem at all possible. And he held to it and he worked on it and he linked people and he took brave steps first. And the really, I suppose, when we look at collaboration for the challenges of the future, it's important to hold collaboration has already achieved extraordinary things. So what has happened in Ireland over the last 25 years because of the work and the efforts of people like John Hume and the people who worked with him to bring a kind of a peace, never a perfect peace, but a kind of a transformative development. I suppose that can inspire us too, as we're looking to tease out what collaboration is. So next slide, please. So what I'm hoping that we would look at in the next while is together, and we want to begin this, that there's no model, there's no clear answer to this. We want to, as a community of people who work and are committed to change and work with other organizations and probably have been doing this for a long time, I'm kind of proposing to you, a little like I mentioned at the beginning, that we all go off now for the next while, maybe for a half an hour in our groups, and that we go into 5 different fields and we kind of dig in those fields and try to understand what soil is there for the possibility of collaboration in each of those fields. And so one of the fields, the first field, will be to go to the kind of what's going on in you personally when you try to collaborate. What are the personal challenges and obstacles? And then the second one, Rosie, just moving on, would be what's going on in your organization when you try to dig in and you try to, if you dig into what's going on in your organization, what are the blocks, the challenges and the obstacles there? And then at a societal level, what's going on? So those 3 would be more focused on kind of asking people to go into those fields in groups of small groups and to explore and really try for this collective to try to get a better understanding of what is blocking the collaboration that could get us to the better world we want. And then a 4th level would be just to look at that in terms of maybe the more brighter side, the spots like what actually excites or inspires you about collaboration, and to get some insight into that. And then the 5th level would be to look at, like, for collaboration to take root, for it really to take hold, what are the behaviors, the habits, the practices that you see from your experience that are critical to effective collaboration? So I suppose what we're hoping is to begin a conversation now, to go to our fields, to dig in, to really look in together and to talk to each other, to give concrete examples and learning about what we see in each of those areas. And that in 35 minutes or so, we'll be able to come back with something that will be relevant and useful and insightful for this group together. And then in a way then that we've taken a step that by this afternoon, when you go back to your life or you go back to your organizations, that you're going with some richer insight about what is needed to make more effective collaboration possible. So I think at this point then we're really going to move to break out to those groups. And we have 5 questions, which are specifically here and which each of the facilitator has in each group. And I think, Rosie, will I pass to you on that, or?
Yes, yeah. So we actually we're going to be having 5 breakout groups for the 5 questions. So ignore some of the numberings there. And yeah, each group will have at least 1, if not maybe 2 facilitators who will help to sort of take some notes and guide the conversation and ask some questions. And Ian is doing our breakout rooms for us. So over to you, Ian. Thank you. And yeah, we'll have about 25 minutes, I think. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone.
Oh, here we are.
Fantastic.
Sorry, first of all, I do apologise, group. I just cut you off, and you in particular, Denise, full swing. But maybe you could feedback that point you were making, Denise. I'm sorry about that, guys.
No, it actually was made in the group, so we're absolutely fine. And Jonathan has agreed to feed back, and with any comments, welcome from our group.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, do you want to kick us off then, Jonathan? And
Yes.
maybe you can just tell people what sort of rough topic you were trying to focus on.
Yeah, obviously great and rich discussions. We think that obviously, there's a saying in French that charity begins at home. So it's really important that, personal experiences that people go through can be adjusted before people can start collaborating. So really important that, people look into those. I mentioned the fact that in the field that I work, so many challenges, people that can have languages, traumatic experience that they've had. But then when you invite organizations to collaborate, it's really important that people can start from the same point, so that they can progress together. We talked about, the importance of being honest when you collaborating with people. We talked about accountability, really important to have clear ways of working so that everybody can see what in it for them when they're collaborating, not just, getting into something and then you find other people have got more voice than others. So setting those rules, not rules as such, but clear ways of working before collaborating. There was also something about, the competition that can exist. Is it healthy or not healthy? So again, it depends on the circumstances, but we say that, yes, it could be good to have competition, but really important to have communication and to be able to be accountable as well when there is such a thing in the collaboration. But we say success cannot happen alone. There's nothing that can take place in isolation. Collaboration is the key to success. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Really nicely summarised there. And moving on to another group, I think Debbie Senna, you're feeding back from your group, and if you can just explain what topic you were talking about.
Yes, so we had 20 minutes to solve the challenges of collaboration in society, and we did it. We started by I gave an example of the issue of river pollution in the River Wye, a beautiful river sort of close to here, which is over the decades got more and more polluted, and it's in a terrible state. And there's a lot of shouting going on at the moment, environmental organisations shouting at the government and water companies and chicken farms, and we're all sort of shouting at each other. And the point was that actually the change often is going to happen when you're having conversations with non-natural partners. So you're having, you're talking with people that you wouldn't normally talk with. And we kept coming back to this issue of, or the importance of understanding and conversations. We'd have liked more time. And the reason that these partnerships are so difficult, we're talking about the social media culture and the way that organizations will need to take credit. There's a lot of sort of anonymous shouting and aggression and blaming and shaming, which can lead to risk aversion, all which is not conducive to successful sort of these kind of collaborations. And then a feeling of being overwhelmed by sort of issues that people get. Another sort of, I think, important point, Seamus was saying that the Chinese character for crisis is the same as the character for opportunity. And we tend to wait for the catastrophe before we collaborate. So it's not until we've got, no chances left, or we're in a real sort of position of weakness, that we go to collaborate. So yeah, that's just sort of some of the things we talked through. Feel free to add anything I've missed.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Debbie, and great to hear, yeah, what you think about collaboration within society. Obviously, that is a huge topic, and I'm sure we can delve into that more in other webinars. But I think already some similarities as well with the first group in terms of, you know, trying not to be competitive, understanding that often does happen, but understanding, you know, how to move around that and not leaving it too late, not leaving it until you're sort of reactive rather than proactive in times of crisis. The next group, I think Kamal and Ian, your group, you've got quite a few different people speaking, as I believe. So I think Patricia, you're starting it off, and then over to Anne-Marie after that.
Sorry, Ian invited me to share an example I gave of effective collaboration. Jonathan mentioned that the how we work and collaborate is very important. And I met with my siblings. As the youngest sibling of 5, I met online last night to talk about how we'd address my mum's care needs. So that has an ability to fall into established patterns very quickly. So I took the risk on WhatsApp of throwing out in advance, how about we rotate the note-taking and leading of this, and expected a resounding silence. But I was surprised by one of my brothers, who then, when I picked the note up at the end of the meeting, I said, well, why don't we do this? I did mention that. How do people feel about that? So it took a bit of stoking, but we now have a rotational leadership model in place. So
fantastic. Thanks, Patricia. And Anne-Marie, were you going to say something?
Yes, when Lean, our facilitator, mentioned in the personal challenges for collaboration, mentioned humility. And it really evoked in me the importance of letting go of the ego, you know, and focusing on the purpose. And also, I suppose I shared on, you know, in collaboration, we have to, it's good to go towards taking risks. And some people, you know, in order to shy off risks, they keep procrastinating, you know, on aspects. So that was really our personal challenges in collaboration.
Thank you. Great. And is Cravan, are you also speaking? I don't know if I'm saying your name right.
Yeah, probably. Creven, hi. Yeah, like along with what everyone else is saying, the really like what a foundational thing to enable people to work together and is really to have a clear shared vision and purpose that they're all working towards. Because without that, then people are going in different directions and have different expectations. And so having that unifying base that everyone can then jump off from is really vital for collaboration.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Lovely. And Kamal, are you just going to wrap up for this group, I think, maybe?
Yeah, no, I just very briefly, I'd add something to what Anne-Marie and Ian were talking about in terms of humility. And one of the things that Anne-Marie said that goes hand in hand with humility is the ability to listen and listen very deeply. And that's where the sort of leaving one's ego at the door comes in. And Cregan was talking about being kind to people in the collaborative network that he's working with, and people needing to take a step back and have some space. And I think there's a sort of a wisdom that sits around humility and deep listening that comes from a more sort of, you know, ability to have space and silence in between the noise.
Great. Thank you very much for your group. And I think in Seamus's group, Amanda, you're going to be back.
Sure. So we were talking about the kind of personal side of collaboration and what's challenging and what holds us back. And I think a lot of what we covered has already been reflected by the other groups. So there's some running themes. So one of the things we talked about was how do you get, we started off talking about how do you get from the vision to how to actually execute it, who does what, getting folks to do a thing. And John was saying, you know, in some parts of your life, you can kind of really take that top-down project manager approach, and they are setting the direction, they're setting the task, people do the task and the job is done. But that is not always a model that works that well with collaboration and doesn't really encourage collaboration either. So we talked through, okay, what other models work. So one of the things we talked through was the fact that folks sometimes skip the vision buy-in part of the process. I think Cregan was maybe just saying that as well. So you collect all the ideas together, a person defines the vision, and then you jump straight to allocating tasks, and you've skimmed over the really important stage of getting the buy-in for that vision, and also making sure that it is genuinely a shared vision as well. So Vanessa was talking about how important it is to make assumptions that folks are all on the same page, literally by documenting it on a page. She had an example recently where folks thought they were in agreement after the end of a few meetings, but once these agreements were documented, that's when kind of the assenting voices came up. And Seamus was talking about the challenges around how to get quality assent during a meeting, because that's not always natural to folks. And we talked through a few techniques to kind of help encourage people to give that kind of quality dissent if it's needed. And we talked about some of the things that maybe hold folks back. So confidence might hold us back, and also the fact that it's quite a vulnerable thing, collaborating. You're kind of admitting that you need help and you can't get to where you need to be without support and help from these other folks, which led us on to a conversation about collaboration really is hard work. Particularly at the moment where you're trying to build relationships with folks on Zoom that you've not met before in person. It's so much easier in person. And we talked about, okay, this seems like a lot of hard work, is it worth it? By the end of it, we decided it was, because there's that saying that's trite but true, that whole thing of if you want to go fast, go alone, if you want to go far, go together. So we decided on balance, yes, it's worth it, but let's not underestimate quite how hard it is to collaborate effectively.
Definitely. No, I'm really glad you brought that in. And yeah, and also thinking about, you know, that we're living in this pandemic, post-pandemic world, and you know, the challenges that brings, and maybe even the opportunities it brings as well. And you know, everyone's context is so critical to thinking about collaboration, and we've always got to take that into consideration. Well, I think just left is our group, and hopefully our group might excite you a bit more, Amanda, as we were talking about the possibilities and what excites us about collaboration. And we were talking a lot about the environmental sector and also sort of the caste system in India. And Carrie-Anne's just going to mention a bit about what excited her.
Sorry, I keep getting messages to say that my internet connection's unstable, so if I freeze or go off, I apologize in advance. But yeah, as Rosie said, we were looking at what excites us and inspires us about working together, and I gave the example of a few years ago being part of a festival, a green festival, which brought together hundreds of like-minded people. And for me, it was getting all these people in the same room at the same time, working with a common goal. I mean, it was very inspiring. And funny enough that Amanda had said it's you know, about the support. You know, sometimes it's hard to ask for support. Well, being in that room with hundreds of other people, it felt like, okay, I'm not alone. I've got the support of hundreds of people. This is when, you know, because we were looking at the environment, which can be it's an overwhelming topic to address, and having everyone on board, it didn't feel so overwhelming when we were all together, which I think that's the great thing about collaboration. And also Maya had a great point in terms of, you know, you have the potential to increase your impact by working with others is immense. I mean, you can share learnings, avoid duplications, there's so much potential there. We were looking at the positive sides, but I mean, it's not without barriers. I mean, as you've said, collaboration is challenging. And I think was it Patricia? No, Charlotte hit the nail on the head when she said something along the lines of, how do you create consensus when there's so much diversity in the world? So we were looking positively, but we didn't resolve anything. But yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Carrie-Anne, and thank you everyone to all the groups and for, you know, participating so well in this conversation. And this is just the start, and I know we haven't had a long time to speak today, so hopefully we'll have more opportunities, and Seamus will explain about that going forward. So now I'd like to introduce Ralph, who will then also pass to Kamal, who they're just going to bring it alive a little bit in terms of their own context and what collaboration means to them and their reflections. So over to you, Ralph.
Thanks, Rosie. Could you put on the slide, please? Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to say a bit about the significant but subtle role that organizational culture plays in the success of a collaborative effort. Much of what I share, I've just heard from the group sharing from your own learned experiences. So that's good. I will use 5 or 6 slides and speak to them. And this first slide is about if one doesn't factor the different underlying cultural aspects into a collaborative plan, experience is that the collaborative effort will limp. The next slide, please. In practice, collaboration happens best in an organizational culture that deliberately invests in the effort required to make it happen. That often comes from an experience of one's fragility, loss of ego, a crisis, and an awareness that together might be better. The post-pandemic world opens many such opportunities. Next slide, please. Collaboration doesn't occur if someone just initiates it. It requires a shared vision and purpose, already said, to be strategically ingrained into the workflow and into the attitudes and values that are cultivated and promoted at the workplace. Communication across levels is the key. Next slide, please. Not everyone gets excited about collaborating. It also brings up people's fears. Hence, all stakeholders can do with help to recognize that collaboration is a win-win for all. Employees need to see that there are real-time personal benefits for them in a collaborative environment. Their jobs will be easier, and it will be great, and it has greater scope to take everyone involved to the next level. Next slide, please. Continuous monitoring and reinforcement are necessary to ensure sustained behavior change and to prevent stakeholders from falling back into their old patterns. From a culture perspective, collaboration is as dynamic as the people involved in it, and hence plans and strategies need to be flexible. My final slide. Experience shows that collaboration mostly happens top-down. By example, leaders require to learn how to get out of the way, understanding that micromanaging stifles collaboration. I now hand over to Kamal, and he'll give you his experience of how collaboration has worked. Excuse me.
I'm on mute, sorry. So thanks, Ralph. Yeah, a few days ago, I heard a very worrying piece of news. I'd heard that it was about a friend of mine and a former colleague of mine who I'd worked very closely with on a peace building and conflict transformation project in Cameroon. And I heard that he had been kidnapped and held to ransom by a militia group as part of the separatist conflict that's currently having a very devastating impact on Cameroon at the moment. And before I go any further, I'm very pleased to say that we've subsequently heard that he's been released unharmed, but shaken by the experience, thanks to the efforts of his family. And it was a very sobering and salutary reminder that conflict can often feel like the absolute polar opposite of collaboration. It's what happens when people fail to see eye to eye. It's what happens when people fail to find common ground or shared purpose. But as I think Seamus is going to touch on in a little while, conflict can often lead to breakthrough collaboration. And that's actually what happened with the project that my colleague and I had worked on 8 years ago. In 2013, we were spent about 5 days on the road in a community consultation with various different communities across the 5 districts of northwest Cameroon who had been embroiled in a conflict that had led to the destruction of property, it had led to violence, and it had also led to, in the severest cases, loss of life. And the conflict essentially revolved around access to natural resources and was between indigenous crop farmers in the northwest region and Bororo Fulani cattle herders who were very much seen as outsiders, having migrated to Cameroon in the early 1900s. And in the early days, there wasn't a huge competition over access to natural resources, the land and water that both communities needed. The farmers would grow their crops in the fertile lowlands, the cattle herders would graze their cattle in the fertile pasture land in the highlands. But with increasing population growth, climate pressures, soil degradation, water pollution, the two communities came increasingly into contact with each other and increasingly competing over their access to land and water. And a real trigger point for the conflict was around when cattle would stray onto crop farmers' land and destroy crops. And then there would often be retaliatory behavior and cattle would be killed and property destroyed by return. So that was the sort of at the heart of the conflict. And in the 70s, there was an attempt to introduce dispute resolution mechanisms whereby compensation payments were made to the aggrieved party if they'd had crops destroyed or cattle damaged. But this was a very litigious approach to conflict resolution. It was mired in bribery and corruption, and it did very little to solve the root causes of the conflict, which was access to natural resources and a breakdown in trust and communication between the two communities. So I just want to touch on a couple of the interventions that the project made that attempted to address the root causes of the conflict and build trust. And both of those were essential for collaboration. So the first one was we introduced dialogue platforms, and this idea that conflict can be an opportunity for breakthrough collaboration, but only when there is a willingness to have an open mind, a willingness to dialogue, and a willingness to listen to people who may not see the world in the same way that you do. And these dialogue in the conflict hotspots enabled farmers and grazers to come together and look at the causes and consequences of the conflict. So, for example, the grazers were able to understand that, if they allowed young people to herd their cattle, they were more likely to destroy crops and break into land. The farmers were able to understand if they didn't protect perimeter fences or maintain them, then the cattle would veer onto the land. So out of this sort of deeper understanding of the causes of conflict, there was small-scale collaboration. Farmers and grazers would work together to maintain perimeter fences or shared water points. But at the heart of it was this willingness to engage in dialogue and a willingness to listen to another who you may not initially trust or may not initially see eye to eye with. And then the second element was around alliance farming. And this was whereby the idea is that cooperation can lead to quite innovative collaboration. So the cattle would come onto the land outside the crop growing season. They would eat the crop residue, manure and urine would fertilize the soil. The cows would be healthier because of the nutritious crop residue. They would come off. The farmers would plant the crops in increasing soil that was more fertile, and that gave them more yield for their crop. So it's a real win-win use of shared natural resources, and that came about as a result of identifying shared resources and shared opportunities. Could I have the next slide, please, Rosie? And so this is just a sort of a little insight into the sort of overlapping interests and sharing resources. And I'll just end by saying it's really tragic that the current situation in Cameroon shows the sort of devastating impact that what can happen when minds become closed, people hold their worldviews more rigidly, and the ethnic component to the conflict is really playing out again and contributing to the conflicts, because the Fulani are seen as outsiders, colluding with the government. And so really perspectives have become entrenched and mindsets have become closed. And I think that stands in quite stark contrast to the sorts of things that can happen when people are more willing to hold their worldviews less rigidly and open and listen openly in dialogue with others. So that was just a little flavour of some work I've been involved in around collaboration and conflict. Thank you.
Thanks, Kamal. And over to Seamus.
Hi everybody, and thanks Kamal and Ralph for those, and to everybody in the group session, just for the we wanted to begin with what people experience about this, and I think they were really rich sharings and insights bringing alive. And I suppose it really makes me think we have to start with people's own perspectives, because people will have their own history, their own experience and context. So that's really important. And I'm not going to go against that now. I do want to offer for a couple of minutes some pathways. The word model was used. I don't think it's a model, it's pathways of things, reading around and listening and talking with people about this that might be helpful for considerations. They're like other fields you might want to go to, so to explore things that could be helpful in helping us to move. And I think they relate well to some of the things that we've been discussed. So I'm looking at 4 areas here. One is about collaboration often happens between organizations in the context of networks, of small, medium, larger networks with different organizations. So I'm particularly thinking of that kind of collaboration, and 4 areas that we might keep in mind, or just to consider, could these help you from where you've heard yourself or where you've heard other people be at. And they're about mapping the networks, designing networks, weaving networks, and stretch collaboration. If we go to the next slide. So mapping, I suppose mapping the network, the key kind of thing here is you can get into this in very complex and complicated ways, I suppose, in social network mapping and using software and tools, which I think can really be of help. But I suppose the core point I want to say in trying to map is to try not to start assuming your today's sense of where all the other parties are is actually accurate. So it's kind of having the discipline of saying, I would like to be collaborating with 10, 15, 30 other organizations, and having the rigor I need to really understand who the other organizations are, where they're at, how they're connected. And if we're already in a network, how we're communicating, how we're coordinating, how we're collaborating. And I suppose network mapping is a way, it's a route, and we might go into some more detail another time, but it opens up a possibility, and it's really to kind of get a more accurate, I suppose when you're dealing in collaboration, it's very hard to really get beyond very impressionistic senses and subjective senses of the collaboration potential if you only go with, oh, this is what they want, or this is how I see it. So I suppose network mapping is a possible pathway to go to get a more rigorous evidence base, and it can be done through surveying and visual tools that will show you the state of the network and how people are connecting that. So that's one area to possibly consider. If we go to the next slide. Second kind of key point, and I think this is, I find this a really important thing. I think people react to collaboration, and we heard on it, and it's great that there's such honesty and openness. Collaboration is difficult and doesn't happen easily, and it's costly of time and effort and all that. And then there's a kind of that we kind of think it should just happen automatically, or the power of the people should just get together. It should just kind of happen. And from people like Peter Plastrick, Madeleine Taylor, and John Cleveland, very strongly that successful networks are designed. They don't just happen. And I think that's a really important thing to consider in our thinking about this. If you want different kinds of collaboration, and the next part there, Rosie, please, if you want different parts of how people connect, that things like this are good questions to address. If you want to design and to build more solid and substantial and ongoing ways in which organizations or people from organizations work together, that these kind of questions do need the time and the effort and consideration, particularly the ones around the purpose. What's this for? I think if we ever move away from that, what's the purpose of this? It kind of really stays as the North Star to to unify the time and effort that people have to put into working together. So all of those areas, purpose, membership, operating principles, how people work together, and what the practices are that you establish in your group are all things that need to be attended to if you want this to move beyond kind of the forlorn hope that it'll automatically happen. So I suppose that's one area that we can design networks, and more can go into that. Move to the third area. Yeah, for me, this is really about, and I rely here on June Holly, who's written a lot about this, American based on weaving networks. And I suppose it's really about the image of weaving, that the threads of what different people bring, and the color and the texture, and where they fit and what they can do. That's what this tapestry can be about. And it needs very different skill sets to be able to weave. And weaving is a very different kind of mentality and an approach to working with other people than, and it was interesting in our group, than very standard organizational models of leadership we work from. We work from a lot of very hierarchical models, and a lot of very command and control, and a lot of plans that you have to have for your funders or for your government, and things that have to be done. So we very tight control models, I think, about how people should work. And I suppose I really want to say, I don't think, and it came up a little bit in our group, I don't think those are the most helpful attitudes or things to have in mind when you're talking about situations where you're trying to work with other people that you don't command and that you don't control and that you can't tie to a plan. So it's always like we need to do a rethink in our mind and find different skill sets to be able to work with people. And it's like the previous thing, it is possible to design these collaboration practices, but we need to learn different skills, I suppose, we think. And things here, and we've heard them as coming up, and that really, like the ability, so to be not a traditional top-down control leader, but to be somebody who's kind of weaving in the context of what you're doing. And the skills and attitudes there are things that we've touched on, like to be able to unearth people's dreams and visions. Like if you're going to break through the pressure and the time and the hassle people have, if you want people to row in with your network, you need to be able to unearth people's dreams and visions, to have really appreciative relationships. We talked a bit in our group about vulnerability and confidence in groups. So like for networks, people are going into tricky spaces. So it's really important, this affirmation and positivity and encouragement of people, if you want people to come in and stay. Really just, and I think Kamal touched about there, like conflict, like the reality of people working together and everything we were discussing. Any 10 people working together about any important issue, there will be difference. There will be different views and different solutions and all that. And unless we can move to kind of ways of finding the skills to think of conflict, it's difficult, but also as possible opportunities to find skills to work through those things. So I suppose that's the kind of core point there, is to consider, are the kind of standard models of leadership we're using, are they helpful to weave and connect people in more positive, constructive ways? And then the fourth area, this I borrow from Adam Kahan, who I find to be a totally inspirational writer on this area of facilitation, people working together. And he has this notion, and I think in my research and reading on this, I find his stuff the most kind of illuminating. And it goes against something people said a little bit. Like the really tricky thing about collaboration that I find is, you have to, for collaboration to deliver the change that we want in the world, we have to collaborate with people outside ourselves. We have to collaborate with people we don't agree with people who have different futures, visions and different senses of how things can work. People maybe we don't like. And he has this, and he has quite a dialogue about like the collaboration. People often think it's about a unified vision and shared vision and all that. And he's saying that'll get you so far. If that's your context, good luck. But often the real change has to happen. And I mentioned the example, for example, of somebody like John Hume in Ireland in the peace process. It has to happen where people radically disagree. And he has a kind of model that and approaches and things to just consider, to explore, like to accept that, not to try to force people to, there's a one way of seeing this, there's one future for Ireland, or there's one future for Europe, or there's one future for whatever are the great issues, to accept, to be in some space, to be able to accept the plurality of disagreement about issues, and then not to try to force people into a common, this is the only way forward. And instead of kind of holding the connection between people, holding the relationships, really valuing that, to see, can we take steps together? Can we experiment the way forward? Can we take the next most obvious step that we need to do? So he really puts a big emphasis on that. And for me, this is the blinding thing. The last thing is when we come to collaboration, and I can say this having my wife on the call and having former colleagues that I've worked on the call, the reality in collaboration is that we are also often part of the problem. You know, so this kind of that we go out into the world and we'll collaborate and it's somewhere with others. Adam Kahan will be very strong in this kind of, that a real breakthrough moment, it's not beating ourselves up, but there is a real breakthrough moment in kind of being self-reflective and reflective on our own attitudes, our own skills, and how we engage with people and the ways in which we're part. And I think, for example, working in the NGO sector, that's a huge challenge. We want to hold a lot of people to account, governments and donors and politicians, but I think we do really struggle with the holding ourselves to account and that reflection on how we need to change to collaborate. So that's both at an individual and at a personal organizational level. So thank you. Next slide, please. So I suppose they're just offered as possible ways, and I really just put them as modest pathways, and we'll share some resources and links to people on those, of ways in which considerations of in this whole world of working together and of working between organizations, that they may be mapping networks, designing our networks, stretch collaboration and weaving our networks, that those could be pathways to consider and see, can you build that into your practice? Can you follow any of that? And would that help you to build your networks? And then I suppose I want to finish in a way with saying, like, the collaboration, you know, because I really believe in grounding this in the challenge of this, but then to see, and that's why I partly shared that video, if anybody has a chance to look at it or to look at it afterwards, that video of the collaboration when it happens, never to lose sight, it is a thing of extraordinary beauty. So in that video where the flash mob comes and plays this Beethoven-side symphony in a town square, just different people with different abilities at the right time, willing to take a risk, willing to have somebody guide them to do something and to break through and do something there. So I suppose just hoping that people will go away. It's not just that we're trying to do something that's difficult. We're trying to make it easier and find ways to make it easier to do something that is awesome and inspiring and transformative of our world. And to do that, just on the next slide, I suppose this has been a first teasing out of this in the context of CAPLA and a research and learning project that we hope to do with CAPLA and CAPLA partners. And really today was just to get a sense of that. And I hope people have found that a helpful start. What we're going to do and what we want to kind of do this and find our way and what's the useful thing to do. So we will document and put back what we've learned today in the groups, in the plenary, in the sharings and that, and put that back to you in some way. We're very open and very interested to try to reach yourselves and others to explore more in-depth conversations. We've had a start today to go into this in more depth and to really try to get what's in the soil that we can nurture to make this more possible, to really say, like, if you want to achieve those great visions in the world, what can we do to nurture the soil that allows that to be possible? And part of that is to allow collaboration between organizations to take hold. And I suppose out of this, we will, in follow-up with your permission, we will be offering and putting out to you, if this is something that you think you'd like to stay with or to connect with, we'd love you to indicate that. And there will be opportunities to be involved in the reflection and in groups and further conversations on that. So that's I'll leave us with that. Thank you.
Great. Oh, thank you so much, Seamus, and everyone else for their great discussions and feedback. It seems you've definitely harvested a wealth of information there. And just to say, as Seamus said, you know, this is the beginning of something we don't quite know where it'll end up, you know, but the more people and organizations engaged, I think that the richer we can understand and do collaboration. Our learning will be so much richer. We're going to end with a Mentimeter, which is in the chat, as Rosie just said. And just one word, how are you feeling about the webinar today? And just put your words, oh, here we go, it's already coming through. Inspiring, encouraged, energizing, that's great. Encouraged, useful, enticed, oh, that's nice. Hopeful, useful, yes we can, anticipation. Great words. Thought-provoked, excellent. Well, from the words that are coming in, I mean, I personally felt like it was such a useful conversation, and as Seamus said at the beginning, it's one we don't usually have. It's just like we somehow think we're born with this ability to collaborate without actually thinking what it might involve and how we do it, and rich and deep conversations. So we'll be in touch. We can send you all a report of the meeting and share next steps and ways to be involved. But before we go, I'd just like to say two things. One is our next webinar, which is on climate change and biodiversity loss, is on Wednesday, the 8th of December. Please let us know if you wish to attend, and you're all very welcome, and pass it around your networks. The more the merrier. And we've got the dates there for other webinars. We're not quite sure of the order they'll come in, but we'll keep you posted and keep you all in touch. And finally, I think thank you so much everyone for your engagement today, for your contributions of speakers, facilitators, and most of all people who have freely shared their views and experiences. So and it's a great example of, you know, it's much better together. If we were just in a room designing something on collaboration, it would be I can't even think of a percentage, so less rich than having us all together sharing. So a great example of how it can be 1 and 1 equals 3. So thank you all so much, and hope to see you in December.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.